Showing recording to you, Mark?
Not yet. It'll pop up on the screen in the next second. There it is.
Perfect, it's there. Thank you. Okay, thank you for attending the local review body today. This is Wednesday, the 17th of March. So welcome to those in attendance to the local review body of Aberdeen City Council. Please note the meeting will be recorded and published online for public access after the meeting. And all members switch on their cameras but mute their microphones when not speaking. Officers should have their cameras and microphones switched off unless they're invited to speak. I will now ask the clerk to undertake a roll call of members participating today and for all members to confirm their attendance once the name has been announced, so that it's clear for the recording of the meeting. As the local review body contains quasi-judicial business, members are reminded that they should not leave the room or the meeting during consideration of any of the reviews. The meeting has been convened in response to 2 requests for review following the decisions appointed under the Council scheme of delegation. Members of the local review have before them copies of the review documents listed in the notice following the meeting. I will now ask Mr. Mark Masson, Assistant Clerk, to outline the procedure to follow to conduct these reviews. Mr. Masson.
So firstly, just to confirm the 3 members that are in attendance for this first review, which is Councillor Bolton.
Here.
Councillor Allen.
Here.
And Councillor Mackenzie.
Here.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay.
So members have the procedure note which was circulated with the meeting papers and is intended to set out the wider framework within which the review process operates. From this, it is clear that the first task for the review body is to come to a decision on whether the review documents contain sufficient information for the case to be determined without further procedure. And by that, it is meant without further information or representations. To assist, I feel it would be helpful to mention the following. Firstly, that the regulations governing the local review process require that all matters which the applicant intends to raise in the review must be set out in or accompany the notice of review. Secondly, that the focus of the review should be on the basis of what was before the appointed officer when a decision was made, and only in exceptional circumstances will new or additional matters be permitted to be taken into account. Thirdly, to note that the modernisation of the planning system, which included revisal of the planning appeals process, of which this local review body is part, removed the previous right on the part of an applicant to insist on a hearing and replaced that with the local review body, providing them with the power to choose a procedure which more accurately reflects the facts and circumstances of the individual case. And lastly, that guidance issued by the Scottish Government's Chief Planner in 2011 stated that reviews by local review bodies should be conducted by means of full consideration of the application afresh. This review should take the form of a structured discussion led by the chairperson to consider the matter set out in the notice of review before you. And I would conclude by drawing your attention in particular to points 10 to 12 of the procedure note. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Masson. Okay, if we could now turn to the consideration of the first review in respect of the decision to refuse the application for the erection of a replacement, a single-storey extension to the rear of 81 Abergeldy Road. Planning reference number 201167/DPP. We will now hear from the planning advisor, Mr. Gavin Evans, who will provide us with a brief description of the application proposal and a reminder of the reasons why the application was refused. I would point out that Mr. Evans attends today's meeting to provide us with the necessary professional planning guidance because he has not been involved in the earlier consideration of the application under review. Mr. Evans will, however, not be asked to express any view on the merits of the proposed development, and in fact, his role will be neutral, involving the provision of factual information only. And with that, I'll hand over to Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Chair. Just be a second here while I share my screen with everyone.
Thank you.
And just make that full screen. There we go. Hopefully you can see that.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. So yes, as you said there, convener, before us today we have a request for review against an application refused under delegated powers for the erection of a replacement single-storey extension, to the rear of 81 Abergeldy Road. This review was submitted with all the relevant necessary information and within the time limit of 3 months following the appointed officer's decision. The notice of review states that no new matters have been raised, and the applicants have requested in this case that further procedures undertaken by way of a site inspection by members, highlighting their view that location and context are critical considerations and that visual impact has been cited as an issue by the appointed officer. In the applicant's view, the visual impact of the proposal has been overestimated, but we'll come back to that for members to come to a decision shortly. So just a brief description of the site. The application site's located on the western side of Abergeldy Road at its junction with Broomhill Road. The property comprises a 2-storey end terrace dwelling house of traditional style, constructed in granite with a slate roof. And the dwelling fronts onto Abergeldy Road and adjoins number 79 to the southeast. Broomhill Road lies to the northwest, with the boundary wall separating the properties.
Gavin, can I just stop you a minute? Lisa, I noticed you put your hand up.
Yes, Chair, just to ask please if maybe Councillor Mackenzie could keep her camera on unless she's having technical issues.
Are you with us now?
I can't see.
It's on.
All right.
Oh,
Sometimes you
oh,
can't see them, Lisa.
Oh, maybe I can't see it. I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry.
No problem. Thanks, Lisa.
Okay.
Sorry, carry on, Gavin.
No problem. Sorry, just see where I got to there. So yeah, sorry, Broomhill Road lies to the northwest, and the boundary wall separates the property's rear garden with the adjoining public pavement on Broomhill Road. We've got just a location plan from the council's GIS system there, which really just shows the same thing as was on the earlier slide, and then an aerial photo. I'm not sure why my cursor is going a bit mad here. Not sure if you can see that, but just try and ignore that. Excuse me. So yes, to the rear of the dwelling there are existing 2-storey and single-storey offshoots extending from the southeast mutual boundary with number 79. I've got some images that will maybe show that more clearly. Here we are. So just on the left-hand image there, you can see that these are positioned along the common boundary with number 79. These project a total of 10.2 metres from the rear of the dwelling, the sort of main rear wall of the house, and are of approximately 3.5 metres in width. They're also constructed of granite with pitched slated roofs, same style as the main property. The remaining rear garden covers an area of approximately 100 square metres and is enclosed by a high granite rubble boundary wall of approximately 1.8 metres on the Broomhill Road side and at the rear, and by a lower 1.3 metre wall along the boundary with number 79, which you can just about make out on the right hand side of the left image there. In terms of planning history, the officer's report highlighted no planning history of relevance to this application. If I flick on here, that's a view from Broomhill Road, just giving you an indication of the sort of visibility of the site from public areas. So a brief description of the proposal. This is as existing on the left-hand image and as proposed on the right. So detailed planning permission sought in this case for the erection of a replacement single-storey extension to the rear of the property. The existing single-storey offshoot would be removed and replaced by a new single-storey extension projecting a maximum of 11.8 metres out from the rear of the dwelling. You'll note from the floor plans that a portion of that is a sort of covered outdoor deck space, which you can just see on the right-hand image there. So it's slightly asymmetrical in that sense. The extension would span the entire width of the plot, narrowing from 6.8 metres where it abuts the main house to 6.3 metres at its furthest point. The extension would have an asymmetrical pitched roof. If I just move on to the elevations, that'll show that better. I can come back to any of these if you wish. Sorry, yes, the extension would have an asymmetrical pitched roof with an eaves height of 2.5 metres, so that's where the roof meets the walls, and an overall height of 3.4 metres. Finishing materials are described as including anthracite or dark grey cladding for the walls, a grey profiled sheeting for the roof, and alu-clad bifolding doors, which open onto the garden. Drawings also refer to removing the existing access gate on the northwest boundary wall and blocking that opening up with stone to match existing. Having reviewed the plans, that would actually constitute permitted development, meaning that it doesn't need planning permission, is therefore out with the scope of this application, so members don't need to concern themselves with that element of the proposal. Excuse me. This is just a side elevation, so similar to that Google Street View image that we saw looking from Broomhill Road, as existing, albeit you have to imagine the wall in the way there, and then as proposed on the lower image. And just a cross section through showing the sort of internal height and also the asymmetrical form of the roof. Just another section showing the existing property and then the extension beside it for scale. And probably most helpful, these 3D visualizations that have been provided give you an indication of the height relative to the boundary, and the way in which it would open out onto the garden and relate to the existing property. Again, can come back to those. In terms of the appointed officer's decision, the reasons for refusal are included in the decision notice, which is in the agenda pack today. The key points in that are, firstly, refers to the highly visible location of the site on Broomhill Road. Considers that the proposal would have an adverse impact on the streetscape and a detrimental impact on the character and amenity of the surrounding area. Considers also that the extension would be of an incompatible scale to the original dwelling, more than doubling the length of the northwest gable, and sitting uncomfortably with the main dwelling. The proposed extension was therefore found to be in conflict with policies D1 relating to quality placemaking by design, and H1 relating to residential areas of the current local development plan, as well as the associated Householder Development Guide Supplementary Guidance. It was also found that there were similar conflicts with the equivalent policies in the emerging proposed local development plan. In conclusion, the appointed officer found that there were no material considerations that would warrant granting planning permission in the context of these policy conflicts. Excuse me, turning to the applicant's case for review. This is summarised in the notice of review, again included in the agenda pack today. Main points are: the planning officer felt that the extension would be detrimental to the amenity of the area and sit uncomfortably with the main dwelling. However, the applicant disagrees with those points and would refer members to the wider location on a busy, vibrant part of the street, which has a variety of scales and different types of residential development. Considers also that this would be a modern, neat and sharp addition to the streetscape, which would contrast but complement the existing granite dwelling and boundary wall. In terms of consultations over the course of the application, the local Ashley and Broomhill Community Council provided no comments one way or the other on this application, and there were no representations received from members of the public. As I mentioned before, Chair, the applicant has expressed a view that a site inspection would be desirable in this case, so I'll just hand back to you there for members to consider whether you think that's necessary.
Okay, thanks.
I'll just stop sharing there. Thank you.
But before we do that, I think perhaps what we've done in the past is we've looked at some Google Street images of that area and some satellite images so we can see the kind of the back gardens of that. Could you provide those, and then we can make a decision whether we feel we want to go on a site visit or not?
Yep, if you bear with me a second.
See, I'm quite familiar with Broomhill Road, but I'm usually driving along it, so don't pay as much attention.
There we go. So that's the sort of satellite view. So in this case, we're talking about the property right on the end here. just sort of disregard the numbering there. It seems slightly skew with number 81's the one right on the end. Adjoining
Can
Broomhill
I
Road.
get you to zoom in a little bit? I'm just trying to see what the next door neighbour, because they seem to have a full width extension there. Is that right?
What I could do is check that on the council's GIS system. That might give a clearer view. It's possible that it just reads as a full width extension when it's really a patio next to the extension, if you see what I mean. It just all reads as sort of hard surface. We do have an aerial photo. Yeah, so you can't see terribly well there. Couldn't say for certain, but that looks like there's a sort of matching roof form here. So it's a sort of hipped pitched roof, excuse me, hard to say, coming off the mutual boundary with number 81, and then it looks like this is possibly just a sort of patio or, slabbed area.
And can you pull out just a little bit so I can just see some of the other houses along that? You can get a bit of indication. Seems to be a bit of a mix and match, sort of half ones that looks like glass and a longer bit. Okay, that's and can we just see it from the Broomhill Road streetscape?
Yep.
Every time I try and move one of those little men, he ends up in a different part of the city.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying desperately not to do.
You're doing very well compared to myself. Okay, so that's it. And then we've got.
So this is us here. Bear in mind that the Google camera's sort of sat atop a car, so it's at a sort of fair height.
Yeah. Ladies, do either, sorry, or councillors should I be saying, is there any other parts of street, Google street maps or anything that you would like Gavin to explore before we decide whether we need a site visit or not?
Yeah, not the semi-detached one, but the next one up. It seems a longer. It looks like a longer extension. It's not very clear.
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to.
Can you go in on that one?
Too much about that.
Oh, I see the one you mean in the
third house up.
Yeah, that's what I was. Yeah.
Yeah, that one.
There's something here. I couldn't tell you exactly what that is.
There's a line there. I'm not sure if that's an extra extension or what is.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that perhaps denotes that it's not part of the main body of the house, but maybe a shed or something that sits. Because if you see on this image, the adjoining property, there's a shed there. So if we zoom in fact, is that sort of like a lean-to shed? Yeah.
And then he's got a shed after that as well. Gosh, quite cluttered back gardens, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean the neighbour's one's even a bit longer, but that one is too. Okay, that's fine. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Allen. Councillor Mackenzie, is there anything that you want from the Google pictures before we?
No, I'm sorry. I'm quite happy with what I've seen.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. So members, you'll recall, Gavin, Mr. Evans said that there'd been a request by the applicant for a site visit, but I'm content with having seen the photographs that we have. I have sufficient information. Councillor Allen?
I'm content.
Councillor Mackenzie?
Yes, I'm happy with what I've seen.
Okay, so with that in mind, if we could then go back to yourself, Mr. Evans, we made a decision that we have sufficient information to make a decision today. So if I could ask you to go into the relevant policies and other considerations.
Absolutely. Just share my screen. Sorry, it was a different software thing I had open there. PowerPoint presentation. There we are. Right, yes, so thank you, convener. So turning to the relevant policies for assessing this application, first and foremost would be policy D1, quality placemaking by design. This requires us to, in decision making, have regard to proposals being of a high standard of design, which demonstrates an understanding of its context and links to the 6 qualities of good placemaking, just listed on the slide there: distinctive, welcoming, safe and pleasant, easy to move around, adaptable and resource efficient. Some of those perhaps more applicable to sort of larger scale residential layouts and things rather than a domestic extension, but you know, all proportionate really. So the application site in this case is zoned as part of an H1 residential area. Policy H1 sets out a series of criteria for the assessment of new development, just listed on slide here. So firstly, does the proposal represent overdevelopment of a given plot? Would it have an unacceptable impact on the character or amenity of the area? That's one where it's for members to come to their own view on what you feel the character and amenity of the area is and the extent to which this would be to its detriment. Would it result in the loss of open space? Because this proposal relates to a residential curtilage, there's no effect on existing public open space. It's entirely private. And lastly, does it comply with relevant supplementary guidance? In this case, of relevance is the Householder Development Guide, which sets out criteria for new extensions, and I'll just move on to that shortly. Also of some degree of relevance is Policy D5. I'm afraid I don't have a slide up there for that, but that relates to our granite heritage and encourages the reuse of granite downtakings in new development where the principle of demolition has been accepted. So in this case, we saw that the existing rear offshoots are formed in granite with slated roofs, and there is a sort of policy presumption towards seeking or encouraging the reuse of that as a building material in any new proposals. We also saw that this proposal utilises exclusively modern materials. So turning next to the Householder Development Guide, the relevant supplementary guidance. This sets out a series of general principles for all domestic additions and alterations, as well as some specific commentary on terrace dwellings. Firstly, extensions should be architecturally compatible with the original house and surrounding area in terms of design, scale, etc. That's not to say that they have to be exactly matching, but sympathetic in their form. They should not dominate or overwhelm the original house, and the original property should remain visually dominant. Extensions should not result in a situation where the amenity of neighbouring properties would be adversely affected, for example through loss of privacy, loss of daylight, or just general amenity impact as a result of an oppressive presence. Approvals predating this guidance will not be treated as representing a precedent. The built footprint of a dwelling as extended should not exceed twice that of the original dwelling, so we shouldn't be more than doubling the size of a property. In this case, the officer's report highlights that the footprint of the original property wouldn't be doubled here. The extension adds an additional 36 square metres, but that's, you have to bear in mind that there's an existing offshoot being removed as well. So the full 65 square metres has been treated as new by the officer in their assessment. Nevertheless, that still doesn't result in the total footprint of the house doubling, so there's no inherent policy conflict identified there. Lastly, no more than 50% of the front or rear curtilage should be covered by development. The officer's report refers to 36% of the rear curtilage being covered by development when the extension is factored in. In terms of terrace dwellings, the guidance sets out that single-storey extensions to terrace dwellings will generally be limited to 3 metres in projection along a mutual boundary. You'll note the presence of existing extensions to both this and the neighbouring properties that far exceed that 3 metres. Because there are extensions on the other side of the boundary, that can serve to mitigate the impact of an extension on a common boundary to some extent. Extensions of more than 1 storey will normally be refused where a proposal runs along a mutual boundary, unless it can be demonstrated that the specific circumstances of a site and a proposal would ensure that there be no detriment to character or amenity of the area. In this case, we're just talking about a single-storey extension, so can just disregard that particular point. Proposals for extensions to end terrace properties will be subject to these standards, i.e. the restriction to 3 metres, unless it can be demonstrated that site-specific considerations justify a departure. So in this case, this is an end terraced property, and it's for members to have regard to whether there are any mitigating circumstances in this particular site. We've obviously seen that both this property and the adjoining one have quite long projections along the shared boundary, and it's just a question of whether the additional projection proposed here would actually manifest itself in any impact on that neighbour. So that's it in terms of the relevant policy summary. In terms of decision making, just encourage members to consider the following points. In terms of zoning, do you feel that the proposed works would adversely affect the character or amenity of the area as set out in policy H1? Do you feel that the proposed alterations accord with the relevant supplementary guidance, including its general principles and specific points on terraced properties? Is the proposal of sufficient design quality appropriate to its context as required by policy D1? And then sort of wrapping all that up together, does the proposal comply with the development plan when considered as a whole? And having come to that conclusion, do other material considerations out with the development plan weigh for or against the proposal? For example, the proposed plan or any issues raised by consultees or in representations. And then we just require that clear decisions are stated for the decision notice to be issued. And if members are minded to overturn the appointed officer's decision, I'm happy to assist with any conditions or otherwise any questions that members may have before they come to a view. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much, Mr. Evans. Members' questions. Councillor Allen?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions. You keep talking about terrace housing. When I seen the photographs, I thought it was semi. Can you maybe clarify that, Gavin?
Oh, bear with me a second. Get my screen up here. Sorry, Councillor Allen, I think I've got too many things open at once here. Yeah, so just going by, if I could share my screen again briefly, just going by our GIS system, it appears that numbers 81, 79 and 77 are all adjoining. So we would just be treating that, or it would appear that the officers treated that as a terraced property. So I think
the next ones are semi as well, are they? It just seems like that ones are 3, and then the rest.
Yeah, that's right, and it's one of those scenarios where, you know, number 81 obviously is an end terrace, so it only has one adjoining neighbour, so the impact of them extending is only affecting one adjoining neighbour. I think part of the reason that we have more onerous restrictions on terrace properties is because we're trying to look after the amenity of the person who might be in the middle of that terrace and could have potentially an extension on both sides, and that might affect the amount of light that they got to ground floor windows, for example. So if you felt that, you know, that restriction wasn't appropriate in this case, then that's your view to take.
It's a strange situation, well, unusual, I would say. I've got the other question I've got is, with the new extension, the proposed one, is the height any different from the existing, and if so, how much?
Sure. If I can, sorry, I'm just juggling a little bit between different things again here. I'll share this screen. And then if I scroll back to the existing and proposed, there we are. So in terms of the ultimate height, it looks as if the proposed extension on the right is actually lower than the highest point of the existing structure, but that's bearing in mind that, you know, it's on a shallow pitch, so it doesn't look like there's a great difference, really, I think is the fair way to sum it up.
Okay, thank you. That's fine. That's me, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Allen. Councillor Mackenzie, have you any questions for Mr. Evans?
No, Mr. Evans covered it all very well.
Okay. Gavin, it was so funny, Gavin, at the last meeting, I kept calling Gavin Clark, Gavin Evans, so it got a little bit ridiculous by the end of the predetermined hearing. So can I just get you to take a picture up of the materials again, showing the kind of the
Oh, the 3D visual sort of thing.
Please.
Yeah, no problem. There we are.
Okay. So the down takings of granite, there's a suggestion, I think you said that they would be used to close up the wall, which doesn't require planning permission, but it looks like granite in the fascia of that, but is it more modern granite rather than down takings?
In the construction of the extension, well, the elevations don't refer to the use of granite at all. They refer to an anthracite cladding, which I think is just a really dark shade of grey. Exactly what that's formed of, I guess some sort of powder coated aluminium or similar, but there's not a great deal of detail on that. And similarly, the roof shown as a grey profile sheeting. So where there was an absence of detail, we could secure that by way of a condition if you were satisfied that, you know, it's not utilising that downtaken granite or slate.
Okay. Thank you. Is there any further questions for Mr. Evans? No. Okay. Obviously, we now need to obviously determine the application. We've asked various questions. We've seen what currently exists and what's been proposed. I think we've been satisfied with our from the air and from the street level. Mr. Allen, are you in a position to state your decision, reason for it? Oh, hey, Yvonne, you've got sort of like a ray of light coming on you. You look quite angelic. I think it must be.
Oh yeah, I'm trying the sun has just come into the window, and I'm not proposing to shut my curtains. I like this.
That's sun. Okay. Well, we can see you. So...
accept this angelic profile.
Okay.
I'm content with this application basically, but I have also your concerns about the granite. So when Gavin was talking about conditions, etc., I think if I was to agree to overturn the decision, I would wish to have some sort of condition in there that the granite be used so it is more visible than just a wall.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Allen. Councillor Mackenzie?
I've got nothing to add.
Yeah, okay. Again, I mean, I think what we've got to look at is there a defined pattern of architecture in that area other than the original granite houses themselves? And I think we can see a mixture of across the road. I think we've got shops, we've got that perhaps used to be built sort of residential. We've got various sheds and all sorts in the back garden. Of various numbers, and in fact, you know, the privacy I would have thought of the resident at the moment would be pretty poor, given that their windows are facing out towards Broomhill Road. I don't think, given that the neighbour has quite a lengthy extension, that this would be detrimental. There's no representations either from the community councils or objections from neighbouring properties. And my assumption is that they have all been notified and that they haven't found it of concern. I share Councillor Allen's concern in terms of the materials and the use of granite. I think that we should look to maybe get a condition around that. I think the scale of it, it doesn't concern me. As I say, if you look at the back gardens, there's a number of outbuildings and sheds and all sorts. So, you know, it's not a clear back view along the back. So, you know, I don't have a major concern. I think we've got to make sure that these houses are suitable for today's living. And I think if we want to see families continue to purchase them and to live in them, I think it is incumbent on us to try and assist with making these houses work. And I think the application is actually quite nice. I think we just need to maybe put some sort of conditions around the materials, and I've looked for assistance from Mr. Evans, so we call you Clark there. I think it doesn't impact in terms on the character or amenity of the area. It's not overdevelopment. We've heard that it's only 36% of your fertility to be occupied, so there's not overdevelopment. I still think, whilst it may seem quite a big extension in terms of length, I think if you look at the size of the house and the fact that it's single story, for me, it doesn't over dominate. We're not losing any open spaces, we've heard, under H1 because it's a private garden space. I think really I'm content that, you know, we're seeing, yes, some use of modern materials, but I think there could be a little bit more tightening on the materials, and with that I would be content to overturn the officer's recommendation. And I would ask Mr. Evans if he could give myself, Councillor Allen and Councillor Mackenzie some guidance on appropriate conditions.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, it's a little unusual, I suppose, in a way, because what we would be doing here, what the LRB would be doing here, is saying you're satisfied with the scale and general form of the extension, but notwithstanding what's shown on those plans in terms of the materials, you would require a scheme for the reuse of any granite downtakings to be submitted and agreed with officers. I think that's what I was taking from it.
Yeah, that would be perfect. Are you happy with that, Councillor Allen?
Yes, that sounds fine. I mean, I don't know, when they talk about using it for the wall, is the wall going to be part of the actual wall of the extension?
I think what the applicants were proposing to do, Councillor Allen, was to use some of the downtakings to block up an existing gate opening in the wall. So I don't think they were proposing to use it in the construction of the extension at all. Okay,
well, I'm content with what you're saying in that case.
Okay, that's great.
Right, so with that in mind, the LRB's overturned the officer's recommendation and approved it subject to appropriate condition wording by Mr. Evans.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, Councillor Mackenzie, I believe we're going to lose you now because it's in your ward the next. So thank you for attending today. Can I just check, is Councillor Duncan here? Hi, Councillor Duncan. Can I just get you to confirm for the recording you've arrived?
Yes, hello, Councillor Bolton. Yep.
Thank you, welcome. Okay, moving on then. So turning to the consideration of the second review in respect of a decision to refuse the application for the installation of a raised timber decking with external steps and boundary wall to the rear of 24 Good Hope Road, planning reference number 201035/DTP. We'll now hear from the planning advisor, Mr. Captain, who will provide us with the application proposal and a reminder of the reasons why the application was refused. I would again point out that Mr. Evans attends today's meeting to provide us with necessary professional guidance because he has not been involved in the earlier consideration of the application under review. Mr. Evans will, however, not be asked to express any views of the merits of the proposed development, and in effect, his role will be neutral, one involving the provision of factual information only. I would just remind members, given Councillor Duncan's joined us, that the local review body contains quasi-judicial business. The members are reminded that they should not leave the room during the consideration of the review. With that, I'll pass over to you, Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I'll just get the presentation up on screen here. There we are. Everyone see that okay?
Yes, thank you.
Great. So yes, thank you, Convener. As you said, before us today we have a request for review against an application refused by the appointed officer under delegated powers for the installation of raised timber decking and external steps in the rear garden of 24 Good Hope Road. The review was submitted with all the necessary information and within the time limit of 3 months following the appointed officer's decision. So just flicking on, no new matters. The applicant has stated on the submitted notice of review form that no new matters have been raised. However, they have appended a set of plans which show proposals for extra boundary fencing to assist in mitigating any concerns over loss of privacy. This isn't new information as such, in that it was provided at the time of the application and so was before the appointed officer, so doesn't fall foul of that legal test that we've heard about before in terms of raising new information. But it's just important for me at this point to highlight that this is shown just for reference and it isn't actually part of the proposal that's before members today. I hope that makes sense. So I'll just flick through these slides momentarily. The applicants in this case have requested again that further procedure is undertaken by way of a site inspection by members, highlighting that the appointed officer's decision was taken without having visited the site and relied on photographs, therefore has not determined the minimal impact that in the applicant's view this proposal would have on neighbouring properties. So we'll come back to that in a moment. So briefly, we just have the location plan and aerial view here. The application site is a residential plot containing a modern two-storey semi-detached dwelling house on Good Hope Road in Bucksburn, to the north of Auchmill Road and the Aberdeen Timberness railway line. To the rear of the property, its 15-metre deep back garden slopes down to the northeast, so towards its back fence. And the last 3 metres of the garden drops away more steeply than the preceding 12 metres, which is on a more gradual slope. And we do have some photographs and sections that will sort of show that hopefully clearly. The rear garden is enclosed by a 1.8 metre high timber fence along its northwestern and northeastern boundaries. So that's the rear boundary and to the neighbour at number 26 here. The other boundary to the adjoining semi at number 22 is demarked by a combination of wall and fencing of approximately 3 metres in height. The rear garden within the plot at number 22 sits at a higher level than the application site. That sounds a bit complicated, but you'll see what we mean with photographs here. So this is the boundary with the neighbouring property at number 26, and you can see how it slopes downhill. And to some extent, you know, there's an open aspect and a view out over other gardens here. So that's the fencing, which doesn't entirely prevent, you know, views into the adjoining garden. It's sort of hit and miss style. And yeah, on the right hand side of this image is what I was referring to. So you can see on the right hand side of the image the boundaries. The boundary enclosure is much higher, combination of wall and fence, and that's because the ground level in that adjoining site is actually higher. So this is a retaining wall that's doing some work in holding that. There's a rear access lane, which is just a footpath only, which runs to the bottom of the plot there. If I just scroll back a little bit, you can just about make that out there. So there's a little lane that dog legs around the back here of number, is that 18 and 20? Yeah, 18 and 20 there to give access. Neighbouring plots to the northeast sit at a lower level than the upper portion of the application site, such that there are currently views over a number of other neighbouring gardens, which you can see quite well from these photographs. So just flick through these. It's taken down from towards the bottom of the garden, just showing the slope back up to the house. Again, the adjoining semi with a higher garden. It's got a shorter garden, so terminates at that point. And there's a little area of sort of just public amenity landscape space in behind. If I just flick back to here, you can just see that there. Sorry to flick around between slides. It's just quite handy.
Layout.
Yeah, so you can see on the boundary with number 22, is that? Sorry, I keep forgetting my numbers. Number 26, sorry. So the boundary to number 26, you can see that there's a sort of dwarf wall section, and then the fencing kind of follows a consistent height that relates to the sloping down of the ground level. Right, so we can come back to any of those photos, but I'll just move on to a description of the proposal So in the top image there you have as existing, and in the lower image as proposed. So it's proposed to retain an area of soft landscape garden space just immediately outside the house, and then to construct a new area of partially raised deck and raised deck, which gradually steps down, so to some extent replicating the drop-off in the garden level, but also looking to make it more usable by creating sort of a series of flat platforms. So the proposed decking area would span the bottom 10.3 metres depth of the garden and cover its full width, so providing roughly 70 square metres in area. It would rise as high as 650 millimetres above the existing ground level at its highest point. And we have some sections and things that should illustrate that a little bit more clearly than this plain site plan. You'll see here in the right-hand image, which is as proposed, that the steps are arranged down the boundary there. And these sections probably are the most useful. So as existing, you can see there's a fairly gradual but consistent slope, and then just at the latter portion of the garden it drops away quite steeply. And as proposed, what the applicants are proposing to do is construct deck above ground, but also to partially remove areas of ground in order to allow for the construction of the new deck. So there's a little bit of cut, a little bit of fill, if you see what I mean. And I think that's in recognition of, you know, trying to minimise the extent of any elevation or additional elevation that comes as a result of the proposal. So this is just a section through the site from one direction and this from the other. And you can see how the steps have been incorporated into the design. And there's various spot heights here, just to show any increase above the existing ground level. So at its most, you're hitting 65 centimetres, 58 centimetres, 50 centimetres, 38, and that's again at the highest point, 65. But you have to bear in mind that there is ground removed for the formation of that portion, so that's not 65 centimetres on top of the existing ground level. Excuse me. So sorry, I think I've just sort of described that ad hoc rather than reading my script there, but we also have the mitigation proposals that were put forward, as I said, by the applicant during the application, but they ultimately decided to go ahead and have the application determined on the basis of the original proposal, which showed no extra screening. It is of course open to members to decide whether you think additional screening would address any issues, and that's something that you could seek to use conditions to try and secure. So that's as existing on the top image, and then with mitigation, what's proposed was just to add some additional fencing in order to maintain a 1.8 metre high enclosure, so it's relative to the height of the deck. This one shows it best perhaps. So that's running down the boundary with number 26, where you've got the steps along the boundary, and so there's no proposal to alter the fence up until the point when you're hitting more significant increases above the prevailing ground level, and at that point the applicant had suggested putting in new fencing to ensure that you have a consistent 1.8 metre screen between the two properties, and that would also be done along the bottom of the site. So turning to the appointed officer's reasons for refusal, these refer to a significant worsening of the level of privacy afforded to rear gardens at numbers 20, 26, 28 and 30. Also refers to a reduction in the effective height and level of screening between mutual boundaries to an unacceptable level, and considers that the proposal would be contrary to policy H2, so that's mixed use areas, due to conflict with the amenity of adjacent land uses, as well as the relevant general principles and guidance set out in the Householder Development Guide. The officer also concluded that the proposal would be in conflict with the equivalent policies of the emerging proposed local development plan, and ultimately that there were no overriding material considerations in favour of approval. The appellant's case then, summarised in a supporting statement, which was included in the agenda pack today, refers to the reasons for refusal directly, and the main points are: firstly, that the applicant's garden is steeply sloping, which presents a challenge in terms of its usability, and this proposal is intended to reduce maintenance and increase its usability for residents. Argues that the lack of a site visit has unduly affected the decision to refuse on grounds of overlooking, and argues that existing boundary fences already vary in height and the proposed deck levels have been designed to limit overlooking, with steps directly abutting a boundary fence. Highlights that the neighbouring properties are already overlooked from the existing garden level and that there would be no further loss of amenity due to the raised decking proposed. Highlights also that due to the garden level sloping at an angle, there's only actually a small portion of the decking that brings it out with the scope of current permitted development rights. And the appellant has provided a plan just on the next slide here to show that. So this is referring to permitted development rights, which basically allow for various minor works to be undertaken by householders with the benefit of a blanket or automatic grant of planning permission, meaning that people don't need to submit formal applications. So just referring to that, this is under Class 3D, which allows for the erection, construction, maintenance, improvement or alteration of any deck or other raised platform within the curtilage of a dwelling. And that is subject to limitations, stating that it would permit the construction of a deck or other raised platform in the rear garden so long as the floor level does not exceed 0.5 metres and that the combined height of deck and any attached balustrade or screening does not exceed 2.5 metres. So in this case, there's no extra screening proposed, and we saw from the cross sections and things that the maximum height above ground level is 65 centimetres. So it's for the sake of 15 centimetres that it wouldn't be permitted development. It's worth bearing in mind also that excavations can in themselves require planning permission. So this permitted development's sort of geared towards just putting something directly on top of the earth. So anyway, the applicants also highlight that they had offered to increase the height of fencing, but this was discounted by the officer on the basis that it would adversely affect amenity for neighbours. Case officer also stated that some areas of existing fencing are insufficient. The LRB, as members will know, is focused on the proposal which is in front of us. So should members feel that additional screening or fencing is capable of addressing any issue with overlooking or loss of privacy, then that's something where you might want to consider the use of conditions. Highlights also that the appointed officer's decision was taken after an extended determination period, which had been agreed with the applicant. Again, the local review body today is simply considering the merits of this proposal, and if there are any complaints about the period taken to determine the application, then there are other avenues for that to be taken into account. Disputes the officer's reference to the adjoining property to the southeast being affected, as this actually sits higher than the application property. Just flicking back, you can see that from the photographs. And also concludes that the impact on privacy in the applicant's view would be negligible and doesn't warrant refusal. In terms of consultations, the Council's Roads Development Management team had no objection, and the Bucksburn and New Hills Community Council provided no response. There were no representations also from members of the public. At that point, Chair, I would just hand back to you for members to consider whether you feel a site visit or any other procedure would be required.
Okay. Thanks very much, Mr. Evans. I normally would at this stage take and I see your Google Maps, etc., but I think the pictures you've actually shown are sufficient. I don't believe that I require a site visit. Councillor Allen?
No, I'm content.
Councillor Duncan?
I'm content too.
Okay, so with that, the members feel that they've sufficient information, so we'll now hear from Mr. Evans on the relevant policies and considerations for the review. Mr. Evans.
Thank you, convener. So yes, turning to the relevant policy considerations. Sorry, I had scrolled back there. There we are. So starting with policy D1, quality placemaking by design. This requires development to be of a high standard of design, which demonstrates an understanding of its context. So some judgment involved there in members establishing for themselves what you feel the context is here and how this proposal would affect it. This site is zoned in a mixed use area, and policy H2 applies, setting out that applications must take into account existing uses and the character of the surrounding area and avoid undue conflict. You'll see from the text there that a lot of that is geared towards conflict between different land uses, so commercial or industrial or residential or what have you, whereas this is entirely residential plots that are adjoining, and it really is just a question of how this decking and its scope to increase overlooking would affect neighbouring properties. Turning then to supplementary guidance that's relevant to the proposal. The Householder Development Guide sets out some general principles which are of some relevance, and then also has some specific content on decking. So firstly, proposals should be architecturally compatible with an original house and surrounding area in terms of design, scale, materials, etc. There's a judgment there in terms of whether you feel the design of the deck is sympathetic. It is relevant, that is perhaps relevant that it's to the rear, and so the extent to which it's visible from any public place is negligible. Proposals should not dominate or overwhelm the original house, and should remain visually subservient. Again, the location to the rear is such that the main principal frontage of the property would be largely unaffected. Proposals should not result in a situation where the amenity of neighbouring properties would be adversely affected, for example, through loss of privacy, daylight, or amenity. This really is the central consideration here. I think it's all about overlooking and privacy, judging from the comments made by both the appellant and the appointed officer. Approvals predating this guidance do not represent a precedent in decision making. The footprint of a dwelling as extended should not exceed twice that of the original house. No extension proposed here. It's simply a matter of the ground covering in the garden area. Again, no more than 50% of front or rear curtilage should be covered by development. And yeah, we're not looking at an extension to the footprint of the house itself. The decking really would just act as an alternative to soft landscaping, so akin to a patio really. Specifically in relation to decking, the Council Supplementary Guidance states that proposals should not result in an adverse impact on the amenity of adjacent dwellings, including both internal accommodation and external private amenity space. So what that's getting at is it's not simply about whether there's a loss of privacy within your property, that protection should also extend to garden areas as well. Also, that proposals for boundary enclosures will not be permitted where they would result in an unacceptable impact upon the amenity of neighbouring dwellings. So I think that's looking perhaps at the use of screening or additional fencing to offset any loss of privacy. It's not entirely as straightforward as just putting up a big fence around your new deck or terrace, and that deals with things, because it perhaps creates another issue, if you like. So there is a limit to how high it would be reasonable to put a screen or a fence around something. And the question there, I suppose, is whether you feel that's appropriate here, whether it's necessary, or whether it would be excessive in order to avoid that overlooking. So just in terms of decision making then, the zoning is of relevance. Do members feel this proposal would comply with policy H2 relating to mixed use areas, bearing in mind the neighbouring properties are all also in residential use? In terms of design, is the proposal of sufficient design quality, having regard for factors like scale, siting, footprint, proportions, materials? Would it accord with the general principles set out in the Householder Development Guide and the specific commentary on decking? And then ultimately coming to a conclusion on whether you feel this proposal complies with the policies of the development plan when considered as a whole. Having done so, then are there any material considerations that would outweigh the development plan in this particular case? Happy to assist with any questions, or if members are minded to approve, then any conditions. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much, Mr. Evans. Questions for Mr. Evans? Councillor Allen?
Yeah, I'm really fascinated by this, because when I first read it all, I thought, why do you need permission to put some decking in your garden? It's jumping about all over the shop recently, folk with barbecues and encouraging outdoor use of gardens. But could you just reconfirm for me, Gavin, the actual reasons why people need planning permission for decking?
Well, ultimately, planning permission, well, where to start? Ultimately, we start off with whether something constitutes development or not. And what can constitute development in forming decking is both the construction of the decking itself and its elevation of the ground above the prevailing ground level, or conversely, the excavations required to form the sort of level surface. So it can get you coming and going, if you see what I mean, Councillor Allen. The permitted development rights that allow for decking in certain circumstances are sort of predicated on level ground almost. You know, if you've got a bit of level ground and you can put some decking on it, provided it's no more than half a metre above the level of the ground. It gets more complicated and it gets more tricky if you have a garden like the applicants do here, where you're trying to deal with a significant level change, and trying to do that, they're doing a little bit of excavation, they're doing a little bit of increase in height to provide the sort of flat surface, and that's where the need for planning permission comes in. It's not to say that it wouldn't be granted, it's just that it's out with the scope of the permitted development rights, so we need to take an application and have a look at it.
Okay, thank you. It's just because my son is a landscaper, and I said to him, I hope you're getting all this planning permission. He says, Mum, we don't need it, but obviously he's working on flat ground. Thank you for that clarification.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Allen. Councillor Duncan, have you any questions?
Yeah, just for clarification, if we could go back to the photos actually. So the aerial shot that shows the houses.
Sure. Sorry, lots of slides. There we go.
Yeah. So the house upwards, the one with the red car in the garage, that one, that goes to a point at the end, doesn't it? The garden, and that's where the decking would be, at the end of the garden at that point, but also steps down the side. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. So the steps are going down the boundary with this property with the red car there.
Right. Okay. And that's one of the side. That's the side that the mitigation proposed is the stepped higher fence to take it up to 1.8 meters above the decking.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. And on the other side of the garden, so that's the raised wall, the enclosure. Really, it looks like a bit of a stockade. There's a white box. You can see. I wish I could.
Just here.
Yeah. Is that the amenity area that was talked about?
I think it's beyond that, isn't it?
Yeah, it's beyond
I'm
that. Yeah.
wondering. No, I think that is within the curtilage of that property, Councillor Duncan. I'm not sure exactly what it is. That could be a patio, perhaps.
Yeah, I wondered. Yeah, but it's still quite. It's much higher. So that's a meter above. Yeah. Anyway, it's higher than the.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly how high, but it does look to be sort of considerably higher in terms of the ground level behind there. Yeah.
Okay. I think there's another photo. See that sloping down fence on the right-hand side after the higher area. I think there's another photo that shows that fence from a different angle.
Okay.
There.
That one.
Yeah, there. So that bit of the lower fence, the bit of fence that's not on the wall, is that is that bordering the amenity
Yes, I
Right.
believe so. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Right. I'm just trying to work out. And can we go back to the shot that shows the garden from the top down?
This one.
Yeah, it's quite high. The gardens
Yeah.
beneath it are overlooked at the moment. I mean, if the householder had a table and chairs at the top of the garden, where they probably could at the moment, they'd be looking over everybody else's garden right now.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. Really, I think what's in front of us today is to what extent that changes and whether that change is significant in terms of the additional loss of privacy, if you feel there is any.
Yeah. And just for clarification as well, on the other side of that fence at the foot, there's a path. Yes,
That's right. Yeah, it's just a pedestrian sort of footpath that it's not a through route, but it goes round the back of this terrace, presumably in order to give access to the rear for the mid terrace property, because the one here can go down the side, the one here can go down the side, but number 18 is sort of landlocked, so that's usually why you have a path like that.
Right. Okay. That's helpful. Okay. No, that's my questions, just to clarify what we were actually seeing. Thank you very much.
Okay. Again, I actually don't have any questions on this. Gavin, you did a very good job in explaining it from what was quite a confusing starting point, I must admit. I'm quite comfortable with the information I have in front of me to move on to a discussion and determination. Perhaps I won't put you on the spot straight away again, Councillor Allen. I'll maybe start myself. Personally, I don't have an issue with this application. I would move that we approve it. I think when we're talking about an angle of 15 centimetres that wouldn't be permitted to permitted. You could have a kid on a trampoline causing more privacy issues than you could have somebody sitting. I think it's an unfortunate garden that is very difficult to use because of the sloping down. And I think it's making best use of outdoor areas, which, you know, we're always encouraging people to get outside and enjoy the fresh air. So for me, you know, I'm quite content, and in fact, I'm a bit surprised that this has been refused. And I would be moving. I don't think, you know, if we look at D1, I think it is in line with the type of development in terms of the house. I don't think it has any impact on the amenity of the existing neighbours or area. I think we've had no objections, and the community council in Dice is very active, so I think we would have heard from them. None of the neighbours have objected. I think we've got so many variations of heights and fences and overlooking of them that, you know, I really genuinely, I'm a bit of a loss at, as I say, the refusal of this, and I'm more than content to approve it. Happy to maybe discuss if we would like to perhaps see a little bit of increased height through conditioning to the bottom part. But again, I'll hear from my colleagues on that point, because I'm not going to kind of high in the ditch for that part either. Councillor Duncan?
Yeah, no, I agree with you entirely, convener. I think I actually think it's really important to have a garden that's usable, and this garden doesn't look usable at the moment, and it's likely to fall into kind of disrepair if it's not changed. And I don't think there's any greater loss of amenity if you put a decking in at the bottom than the loss of amenity caused by the overlooking by the slope of the site at the moment. And I actually think it would probably improve. It would probably improve the area, frankly. So yes, I'm quite happy to grant this application, and yeah, to have a discussion about conditions on fencing.
Thanks, Sue. Councillor Allen?
Yeah, I'm happy with it to approve the application as is. I think it's going to make it more usable. I think it should be used. We need to get folk outside, you know, kids running about, whatever. And I'm content with the application as is. I would overturn the decision, certainly.
Yeah, okay. Gavin, can we just, in terms of, Councillor Allen's quite content, doesn't feel that there is a requirement for adjustments to the fencing at the bottom. I know that, can you just indicate what the difference would be? I think it's marginal, isn't it, really, in terms of what the additional privacy, and given there's no objections from neighbours, and that was prior to the suggestion of I'd be inclined to agree with Councillor Allen that we don't put any additional onus on the resident to provide higher fencing, because I think it's a bit like a wonderland down there as it is.
Yeah, I was just looking back at the mitigation plans that had been sort of previously put before the officer, but ultimately not taken forwards, and the areas where the additional fencing was proposed, partially that was down at the bottom, where, as Councillor Duncan said, this on the other side of there is an area of amenity space, we believe, so that wouldn't seem to be sort of really protecting anybody. At the bottom, that's onto the footpath that dog legs around to the back. Because we're talking about a sort of 50 centimetre difference, if you like, based difference between the level of the deck and the level of the current ground level, you would almost subtract that from the height of the existing fence. So if there's a 1.8 metre fence there at the moment, that would effectively be 1.3 metres without anything additional being put there. So if you bear that in mind, that's sort of maybe a bit above waist height for me. Not sure if I've made myself 8 feet tall there. But I think 1.1 meters is the usual building standards requirement for a sort of balustrade for balconies and terraces and things, because that's sort of at your hip level and stops you from toppling out of things. So the most, well, I'm just wondering if the area where there's potential for more impact would be where the steps are, because the residents would be walking down directly next to that boundary. So, you know, that boundary is not sort of a distance away, that's right next to you. And if that's been reduced down considerably by the introduction of the steps, then...
My thought was, actually, I'm not fussed about the fencing at the bottom because it does go onto a path, but actually the stepped fencing for where the paths are, with that point of the garden next door, I would be minded to ask them to put that stepped higher fencing in, just to give privacy. As you say, Mr. Evans, because people are going up and down steps there. So.
Yeah, what you can see from that lower image is that this would maintain a 1.8 metre enclosure from the level of the deck, so you've always got that 1.8 metres. So it's really up to members whether you think that's sufficient or in fact necessary.
Councillor Allen?
As I said at the beginning, I'm content with it as is. I think 1.8 metres is quite high enough. And as you go down the steps, it will actually increase the height of the fence.
I think that I suppose what gives me comfort is if you do look at that other garden, it does come down to a little point there. So perhaps it's not really a usable part of the garden for that neighbour, that they would be perhaps, you know, I couldn't see them fitting in a terrace or anything at that point. I think it's more likely to be for planting. So I'm just not quite sure whether we need any additional fencing there or not. I can see where you're coming from as well, Councillor Duncan. It's just a difficult one.
Yeah, no, well, because I'm 1.8 meters tall, so I know exactly how high the fence, and it would be 50 centimeters less because of the fencing being built, or the step being built up. And I'm actually thinking, even if the people next door are sitting in their garden further up towards their house, as people are going up the steps, they'll be visible. You know, anybody taller than me would be really visible. Take it down to about bottom of my shoulder level, if it was 50 centimeters, or maybe kind of just above my waist, actually. So I would be minded to put in the requirement for that additional fencing at the garden, because of people walking up and down the steps and actually being able to see over the fence directly into someone else's garden.
So Alan, shall we put that additional fence?
I'm certainly not going to argue about that. I mean, if that's what's felt necessary, I'm content with that.
That's not me.
Vote over it.
Okay. I think Gavin's gone. Yeah. Okay. So I think that what I caught from that in amongst the ring and Councillor Allen is that you'd be content for a condition just with that lower part for the amenity privacy element. Is that right? You're on mute.
Yeah.
Oh. Okay. So Mr. Evans, did you get that from us that just the lower part that we'd be minded to add an element of privacy by perhaps raising that lower part of fencing?
Yeah, so just
not in the end, just into the adjoining neighbour.
Yeah, that's just what I was going to clarify. So it's to the neighbour at number 26, so that's the northwestern boundary, rather than along the foot of the garden or on the other side, because don't consider that to be necessary.
No.
And that would be to a height of 1.8 metres from the level of the deck to maintain that.
Yeah.
Okay, yep, that's fine. That's perfectly clear.
Right, so we've overturned it with that minor condition of just that one part of the fence to the adjoining 26. And that's it, folks. So thank you very much for your participation today. And I'll see you tomorrow, Yvonne, hopefully for a quick meeting.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Thanks,
Okay.
everybody.